Back over to our superintendent, Dr. Bose.
Great, and thank you, President D'Annunzio. And we're thrilled to be able to continue the work to develop an ethnic studies program here in Davis Joint Unified. Let's recall in spring of 2019, we heard many voices in our community advocating for ethnic studies. And tonight's presentation provides an update of the work that's happened and the work that lies ahead. At the heart of this work, our values are aligned in what we believe is important and offering educational experiences that are relevant, diverse, and affirming of our students' identities. Our approach and philosophy for any major program development and how it fits in the context of the broader landscape of history, law, policy, and pedagogy are rooted in our commitment to our graduate profile and also to our board resolution that in Davis, we all belong. That's foundational as well to our work around ethnic studies. Just as with our career technical education and distance learning efforts, our work needs to be intentional and inclusive so that we can create a meaningful outcome and ensure that it becomes sustainable in our classrooms, at our school site, and as part of our district culture. In DJUSD, ethnic studies is not a matter of if, but when. And while COVID-19 has surely turned our world upside down in so many ways, we're proud to be maintaining a continued focus in DJUSD on our ethnic studies programming and very excited about this work. Let me now turn this over to Associate Superintendent of Instructional Services, Dr. Roddy Boonchoy.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. Good evening, President D'Annunzio, trustees, community. Tonight, I know many of us are excited and eager to re-engage our planning for ethnic studies and DJUSD. We began this work last January, which was paused by COVID and then the subsequent school closures, but we're ready to pick up where we left off and proceed in this important partnership and conversation with the community while balancing the unique and heavy responsibilities of distance learning. Work has been underway for 2 years. We've been following the series of state legislative efforts in the development of a model curriculum, as well as building our own foundational knowledge and the relationships we need to do this work well. Tonight, we reignite that vision for our students that reflects their diversity, identities, culture, and lived experiences. Work that is important to us for 3 reasons. 1, it aligns to our district goal of closing a persistent and predictable opportunity gap, including the opportunity for all of our students to see themselves honored in the curriculum and their school experience. 2, it's part of our effort to confront our disproportionate levels of engagement and achievement of many students, particularly our students of color. And 3, improving and increasing racial awareness for all of our students. This is all even more pronounced by the fact that we are navigating a global pandemic. We've upended the traditional paradigm of public education in the era of COVID and amid a broader social and political awakening to issues of systemic racism and social justice. Next slide, please. In short, we'll discuss these points, including a brief review of our Ethnic Studies Task Force and where we left off, the many developments of this extraordinary year of 2020, and how we have grown and what we have learned, including consequential state and legislative updates, and importantly, the plan and process ahead in our work together. Next slide. Recall our Ethnic Studies Task Force. That included well over 100 participants eager to explore and help contribute to the development of a program. We framed the work of the task force around these driving questions, and the intent of this approach was to help us better understand the problem we were trying to solve, and through that understanding, sharpen our focus toward a solution and a process. Those questions include: what challenges can ethnic studies solve, and how do they exist in Davis? What does the research say, and what can we learn about implementation? All under the umbrella of meeting the needs of our students, which will be central to the work ahead. Next slide. We held our first task force meeting on February 19th at the Davis High Library, and there are about 80 attendees there, including students, staff, parents, and members of our community. At that time, we'd been tracking developments at the state, particularly with the model curriculum and the challenges associated with that work. We knew that it was critical to spend the time to frame the work, ground ourselves in our values, commit to norms, acknowledge the role of race, power, and privilege in the room. And importantly, take the time to learn how to listen to each other which we practice through a constructivist listening activity to seek to understand each other's why for this work. The topic of ethnic studies engenders strong emotions, passion, and advocacy, all coming from a place of positive intent, and which made it incumbent on all of us to intentionally and generously listen to understand, listen to be fellow learners. The work of the task force leading up to the next meeting included gathering and reading research, development of small expert teams, and preparing presentations. And this is part of our project-based approach to the task force. On the very week of our second meeting, DJUSD and the regional school districts closed schools in response to the pandemic. And since then, we have dedicated 100% of our time and attention to managing the crisis. But we made progress during that time, and we learned many things along the way, including, next slide, our nation's collective outcry against the death of George Floyd on May 25th. This combined with ongoing incidents of injustice, the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement, and our broader reckoning with long-rooted systemic racism makes it impossible to ignore race right now, particularly as it relates to experiences of oppression for people of color. And this will influence the way we think about ethnic studies in DJUSD. Next slide. These uprisings also occurred against a backdrop of a global pandemic, which has fundamentally turned the paradigm of public education upside down and has required students and educators to do school through distance learning. And although the pandemic raises an enormous set of challenges, it has also raised an opportunity. Though it may be difficult to see that opportunity because we're so immersed in it, we have been required to set aside traditional structures and accountability systems and reimagine what it means to teach, learn, and be successful in an unpredictable and tumultuous world. Never more than now do the competencies of our graduate profile stand out as key to success in the realities of this century. In fact, the entire DJUSD staff reinvented this organization using these skills. The question for now and beyond is, how will we rethink programs and ways of teaching to cultivate these skills, particularly the competency of civic and cultural awareness? This will influence the way we think about ethnic studies. Next slide. During the summer, in our preparation for fall distance learning, we had an unprecedented opportunity for 40 hours of professional development for every teacher in the district, including modules in equity and access, a focus on culturally relevant teaching, a book club on anti-racism, a third year of leadership training for equity and liberatory design processes for the administrative leadership team. We even concurrently formalized our Native American student supports through the federal Title VI grant. And on our most recent staff survey, you can see here, over 60% of our teachers expressed interest in culturally responsive teaching practices. All of this professional development has had an impact, particularly as it relates to equity, and that will influence the way we think about ethnic studies. Next slide. Another exciting development was the passage of AB 24, the seal of civic engagement, signed into law by Governor Brown, and just last month had the criteria adopted by the State Board of Education. The seal is a recognition of students who demonstrate excellence in civics education and participation in the democratic system of government. Criteria for the award include academic and content understanding of the U.S. and California constitutions, but also participation in civic engagement projects, demonstrating civic skills and a civic disposition, and a commitment to impact the community. We see a clear alignment of the skills and dispositions in the civic engagement framework with our graduate profile, and current classes like race and social justice create spaces for students to cultivate their civic mindedness and participation. We see this seal as an opportunity for students to also pursue and earn this recognition through ethnic studies programming. And we are also happy to announce that DJUSD is officially an early adopter district in the state of California for the seal of civic engagement. Next slide. And then finally, much of the research, developments, and learning that occurred from fall 2019 to now were crystallized by Dr. Christine Sleter, who came to Davis virtually last week to present an overview of ethnic studies to our community. As a reminder, Dr. Sleter is a professor at Cal State Monterey and one of the nation's leading authors, researchers, and experts in the field of ethnic studies. And for anyone interested in viewing that presentation, we have a recording of her talk linked on our ethnic studies webpage on the DJUSD website. Overall, Dr. Sleter provided thorough insights and a strong rationale for ethnic studies programming, and through her overview, articulated the core of our inquiry in these driving questions. We know that many students of color who feel disengaged respond well to ethnic studies, and that it heightens and enriches racial awareness for all of our students. We have learned through the research that there is evidence that ethnic studies creates positive academic and personal impact, including positive racial attitudes among students. And we have learned that implementation is difficult and that a thoughtful process is critical, particularly as it relates to professional growth, supports for staff, genuinely listening to the marginalized voices in our community, and taking time to start small and expand as our own capacity, understanding, and self-awareness expands. Next slide. What adults cannot speak to, however, is the student perspective in the community. In a couple slides, we're going to speak to the process ahead as being student-centered and teacher-guided. And like the values and pedagogical practices of ethnic studies, we must listen to our students and enable their leadership. And perhaps this is a question we should always hold ourselves to. How do we honor all students' voices? How do we help them own their educational experience? How do we help them be the leaders of today, not just tomorrow? Through a variety of channels of student voice, from BSU, GSA, climate, through our LCAP student advisory, through student-led presentations at Da Vinci and Race and Social Justice, and more recently, the Davis student chapters of Diversify Our Narrative and Gen Up, we see themes in their perspectives, some of which are outlined here and help answer the question about what challenges exist in Davis that ethnic studies might address. Those include discrimination, prejudice, and racism exist in our schools and in our community. Students have experienced harm as a result of their identity. Many students do not see themselves reflected in the curriculum, and students want to act and lead and want adults to listen and also act. Our quantitative data through the California Healthy Kids Survey and Youth Truth validate these themes. We had the privilege of facilitating a meeting just today for students interested in the ethnic studies discussion. And I want to commend Mariana for participating in that, as well as in the Dr. Sleter session last week. And they provided great insights from their student experience perspective. Next slide. Briefly, this is a quick overview of state and legislative developments regarding ethnic studies. In 2016, Brown signed into law AB 2016 to develop an ethnic studies model curriculum. That was followed in 2018 by AB 2772, which was a graduation requirement for ethnic studies. That was vetoed by Brown, and then it reemerged again as AB 331, also a graduation requirement authored by Jose Medina under Governor Newsom. And during that time, a draft of ethnic studies model curriculum was being developed. Next slide. That draft of the model curriculum has evolved significantly over 2 years. A year ago in October, following public criticism of the draft, legislation was enacted to extend the draft deadline into 2021. CDE conducted outreach to listen and gather information, which led to a revised draft that has and is going through public review and revision this fall. Any state board action on that draft would need to take place by March 31st of 2021. Next slide. Concurrently, AB 331, the law making ethnic studies a graduation requirement, went through a series of developments, including an extension to the bill in 2019 to give time for revisions to the model curriculum. In August of this summer, so just 2 months ago, significant amendments were made, including pushing the requirement out 10 years to 2030. And ultimately, the bill was vetoed last month by Governor Newsom, citing that the draft of the model curriculum was insufficiently balanced and inclusive. These developments, however, do not preclude school districts from pursuing ethnic studies programming on their own, which is our intent. Next slide. Here's a brief snapshot we showed at a board meeting last year, which shows our history with ethnic studies and related programs, and testament to the equity-driven work of DJUSD teachers past and present. A couple of notable points include the early years of Davis High, when it was built in the 60s and offered the richest ethnic studies-related courses. This was not only because of timing with the civil rights movement and proximity to ethnic studies programs in the Bay Area, but that the high school was designed to replicate the multicultural focus and offerings of UC Davis in a predominantly university-affiliated town. Much has changed with the community and schools since then, but a more recent example of a course that is closely aligned with the pedagogy of ethnic studies is race and social justice, which encourages students to interrogate history and power and how injustice exists here and now. So we acknowledge and honor our own local history, and let's look to 2020 and beyond. Next slide. So moving forward, these are the features of our theory of action. We've learned much this year about what it takes to be successful in this kind of work, and based on that learning, we must commit to a process that is student-centered and teacher-guided, meaning that the stories and aspirations of our students are at the center, and that teachers are the authors and guides of those learning experiences. The role of the community is to support our students and teachers in their work. We also know through research that our journey towards ethnic studies must include the time and space for teachers to build understanding and awareness, not only of the content, but of themselves and how their identities intersect with issues of race, identity, and power. And based on our successes with innovation as an organization, we know we need to work together, start small, reflect, revise on a path to scale. We want to move as fast as we can, but we will move as slow as we must if we want success and sustainability. Next slide. And so here's our timeline of the plan, and we may course correct this along the way given the many uncertainties of this year. We reopened our community discussion last week with Dr. Sleter as a guest speaker. Last Monday, we held our first ethnic studies meeting with interested staff, and over 50 participants attended, and they were asked to provide input on process, particularly what it means to them for the process to be student-centered and teacher-guided. We also held the student orientation, like I said today, and listened to them and what they thought it meant for a process to be student-centered, and what ethnic studies means to students and what they believe, what problems they believe it would address. And then we plan on reassembling the broader task force in November or December, and their role will be to support students and staff by contributing to a resource bank, including activities, contacts, expertise, or materials. All of these will be accessible to our teachers as they spend this year building confidence with ethnic studies instruction, and that can be as ambitious as a full-scale unit or as limited as integrating an activity into a lesson. This is how we begin the diffusion of innovation. All the while, however, we will be providing professional development to help build understanding and awareness. This will include a scholar webinar series led by university faculty and ethnic studies practitioners over the course of the year. We are also coordinating more intensive PD opportunities to build a foundational mindset for what it means to be an ethnic studies teacher. Later in the spring, towards the end of the year, we will reflect and synthesize our learnings. We are looking to fall of 2021 to bring a formal recommendation to the board, and then spend the 21-22 academic year planning and preparing for implementation in the fall of 2022. We're eager to do this work. We know it's the right work to be doing, and we are orchestrating a process to get to a meaningful outcome that lasts. We also need to remind ourselves that this is one of the most difficult years a generation of educators has ever faced. Our teachers are putting in long hours, they are tired, and they continue to put our students first. So we need to be mindful of how much we ask of our teachers. But we are going to get there together in collaboration with teachers and community and with our students at the center. And that concludes our update.
Thank you very much for that very thoughtful presentation. So to start, we need to see if we have public comment on this item. Superintendent Bose, is there any public comment on this item?
I'm very sorry about that. Yes, we have one public comment on this item from a group of students, Diversify Our Narrative, DJUSD. Good evening. In July of 2020, the Yolo County Board of Supervisors declared racism a public health crisis. In Davis, a city with a nearly 40% non-white population, racism has always existed and affected our community, whether we acknowledge it or not. Half of the students in our district are persons of color, yet they see little to no representation in their English classes. We are sharing this public comment tonight in hopes of addressing this problem. Diversify Our Narrative, or DAWN, is a national student-led organization that aims to encourage a productive dialogue on race and identity among our student bodies. This goal can be achieved through the inclusion of racially diverse and anti-racist books in American schools. This past summer, DAWN released a petition requesting that districts do the following. 1, require at least 2 books written by and about a person of color in every English or literature class, at least one of which is about the Black experience. 2, create a voluntary task force composed of teachers to issue guidelines that ensure these texts are taught with proper tools to ensure racial sensitivity. Our district's petition has over 200 signatures from DJUSD students, educators, parents, and alumni. Their signatures and testimonies highlight the long-standing history of racism and miseducation in Davis. We cannot expect marginalized students to feel validated without seeing themselves in the DJUSD curriculum. We cannot expect students to empathize with the struggles of communities that they are not a part of without learning about the community's histories, nor can we expect kids to learn about these experiences outside of school. DJUSD must alter its curriculum to reflect the needs of the community. After receiving feedback from the community regarding the DAWN petition, we've come to realize that while it is a great starting point, it is not enough. Many marginalized communities need representation in the DJUSD curriculum. In addition to Black voices, we also hope to include authors from a more diverse range of racial and ethnic backgrounds, as well as texts highlighting female, disabled, and LGBTQ+ experiences. Our education system has failed to educate students about the injustices that so many face and has actively contributed to a harmful environment for students. As powerful community members, we need your support to implement the necessary changes to our curriculum. We are currently working with Davis Senior High School English Department to ensure that our requests can be successfully implemented. We have also been working closely with DJUSD educators, including Rodney Boonchoy, Troy Allen, David Ackamore, and Nina Nero, and have partnered with student activist groups such as Gin Up and the Davis Senior High School Activism Club. Now, we would like to work with all of you to create a resolution based on our petition. Today, we're asking for your support in creating, passing, and implementing this resolution.
Great, thank you, Superintendent Bose. We'll now move to comment, but given the, everything we do is student-centered, but this is a particularly student-centered conversation. I would like to start with our student liaisons, and I'd like to start with Mr. Lee, if you have comments or questions on this item.
Yeah, so thank you all for considering this. I think that it's definitely a particularly important issue. There are a lot of new people coming in, and as we're only going to be encountering like more and more diversity problems in the future, especially with the recent George Floyd incident, I think that it's important to take these kinds of things into consideration. One of my questions is, how are we going to be reaching out to people that we feel like necessarily need help? And how are we going to be implementing the strategies we learn from these ethnic studies to the types of problems that we face right now?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Lee. And that's a really important question. We actually asked that question to Dr. Sleter as we were thinking about outreach and rethinking our outreach. We have a lot of very interested and members of our community that are involved and been supporting this work. And we need to hear from the voices that we don't hear from, particularly our more marginalized communities. So that's going to require us to go to them and identifying ways that we can create opportunities where folks are available, where it's on their turf, and we come in with open heart, open mind, and humility, so that we can truly have a better sense of what the lived experience is of the communities in this town that are marginalized and typically don't have a voice. So that's a very difficult endeavor, but a critical one for us to do this work well. Ethnic studies is a very, at least the development and the evolution of a program is a very local experience because there are stories in our community, there's a history in our community, there are identities, cultural and collective identities in our community that need to be involved in the formation of this program, and however it takes shape. I mean, we create this together, so we need to listen to them. So we're at the very beginning of developing that outreach plan, so that we listen to everyone. The students piece is so critical. In fact, our meeting today and the debrief around that meeting today with our students was, what is that role? What does it mean for students to be at the center of the discussion? How do we structure it? How do we develop norms around that so that our community can listen to our students, genuinely listen to our students, and build off of that experience? I think that's difficult, particularly in an institution that is very adult-driven and has historically been that way. But we actually increase engagement, we build relevance, and we actually create greater depth of rigor when it's based off of a meaningful student-centered experience. So I think that's that question. Those questions you're asking are the work we need to do together, and we have to start from a place of willingness and humility to make it happen. And that's the work ahead of us over the course of this year and into the future.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like, I think that's very important to know that there are marginalized people, but I think there's a problem with answering these types of issues is the very fact that they are marginalized. It's really difficult to get access to these people. And once we do find out what they want or what they want to hear, how are we going to apply it? How are we going to tell everyone else, centering their voices and their ideas and thoughts? And I think that awareness can definitely play a large role in the types of actions that we do and the types of interactions that we have. But I think that awareness might only go so far as to let us know what we're doing wrong. But I think that another really big step that we're gonna have to take is really helping students to realize that not only are they doing something wrong by doing some sort of racist or discriminatory behavior, but that they're going to be willing to fix it as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ms. Ortega-Nunez, questions or comments from you, please.
Hi, and thank you for really pushing for this to happen, because it's really great, because a lot of us go to school and we don't learn about different cultures or races, and we learn from a specific perspective and we don't get to see other perspectives. And I feel like with this course, we will be able to learn more in different perspectives, and I'm really grateful for all of that. And also for the curriculum, I don't know if you were all planning to doing this, but we could help in choosing the books or which ones we relate to or what we think have modern issues that we could learn about. And I think a lot of students would be willing to go over materials like that and giving their opinions on them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, I'll turn to my colleagues. Start with Trustee Adams, please. Your comments and thoughts.
There we go. Let me start with a question for Assistant Superintendent Boonchoi. You didn't mention any particular grade levels or that this was going to be focused on a singular class at the high school level. Can you be a little more descriptive? Are they going to look at things K-12, or are they going to build out a new class, or are we just letting the group be imaginative?
And that right now is how we're launching this, is by keeping this as inclusive and open as possible to define what ethnic studies program means as a community. I think the thing that we learned immediately on Monday when we had our staff orientation was that there is interest from kindergarten through 12th grade of our teachers. In fact, there was explicit commentary from our primary teachers that it needs to start then. these experiences and having these hard, courageous conversations and having forthcoming discussions about history and oppression in great, appropriate ways. But we have strong interest in this district in elementary school as well. So whether or not this is going to end up being an integrated model that's embedded in courses, if we're going to have distinct courses, particularly as we think about it at the secondary level, or both, that's for us as a community to determine moving forward. I mean, if you look at more formal ethnic studies programs that are that have years of establishment in districts in San Francisco Unified and others, there are distinct ethnic studies courses, African American studies, Native American studies courses that have been formally approved and that are running to fulfill that ethnic studies requirement, and that's certainly a direction we can go, and we might be able to do more than that as well. But that's the work ahead of us.
So on that point, I really hope they can explore integrating it not simply into language arts and history, social science, but they see how it can play out in other courses. And so that we can find different role models in the different academic disciplines and discoverers of knowledge, and not kind of be, say, fixated on the traditional narrative that you would find in some of those courses. And I think what I also heard was student voice is important, but I think also student choice. So I think voice and choice for that, because ever since we started to experience student activism in my tenure on the board, the one thing students always said is, we want to be able to say it ourselves. We wanted, we don't really want people telling us what to think. We want to think for ourselves. So I think that's good to see that core value in there. Lastly, I just really want to mention the state seal of civic engagement. I think that's so important in all this. If we're going to raise these issues and talk about them seriously, I think we should also be encouraging action, local action on it. And so that we can, they are learning not simply what are some of the important issues that need to be resolved, but what are possible ways of resolving them. And so I hope, the school system becomes a laboratory for students to learn how to address these issues, and why not do it first under the guidance of teachers, and we too will learn from them, because I think we're coming back to a situation where one of the underlying assumptions is that both student and teacher, adult and students, are all going to be learning from each other, right? And it doesn't seem like the usual learning situation, this sage on the stage, is going to be the only model here, that we're going to look towards each other and in this learning process, not just simply making this, but as part of a pedagogical strategy within ethnic studies when we eventually have a program adopted. So I just want to thank you for putting those things there, and I look forward to more developments. And I just also want to echo one more thing that Professor Sleter said, is this is going to create a lot of discomfort. It's going to take us out of our comfort zones. It's going to ask us to rethink a lot of our assumptions. And also we're going to have to take a new role in this. So I think, just get ready for it. And if you're not feeling discomfort, you're not learning.
Great, thank you, Trustee Adams. Trustee Fernndez, comments or questions from you, please?
It's late and I know we've covered a lot of ground, but I do just want to make a comment because I think this is significant. It's a significant issue, not only for the time we're in now, but really for the efforts of the district. And I really just want to say how, proud I am to be on this board, that initiated really a holistic view and approach to this. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge one of our colleague elected school representatives, Melissa Moreno, in her advocacy, passion, and really her life's work around ethnic studies and making sure that, not only is this of paramount concern, statewide, but certainly in her home district. And I want to thank her for, her insistence on our work. I'm encouraged by the outline that Associate Superintendent Boon Choi outlined, I think, or discussed, and I think I'll be really excited to see the progress that's made, and hope to hear further updates. But thank you. I don't really have any questions. I just want to thank everyone for their work on this and the work in the future to it. So thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Fernndez. So I have just a couple questions. First, a comment. I want to endorse what my colleagues have said previously, and in particular this notion of student voice, student choice. I think that and seeking out those voices that may struggle to be reached, to make sure that we're incorporating into that voice and choice. And I think that if you look at the work, it's not a parallel, but the work that was done in CTE over multi-years, where it was very thoughtful and structured and did reach out to many voices. We live in a district that often, focuses a lot on a college career path. And I think we did a pretty effective job there at finding different ways to get different voices in the mix. And we need to do the same here. It's a different process, but the idea that we put in that extra effort to make sure that everybody that's impacted and that has a point of view gets it, and is part of it. And then secondarily, I want to encourage us to, the timeline is great, and I appreciate what you said about, Roddy, about the struggle with all the other things that our teachers have to deal with and our community has to deal with right now. But this is, it's vital that we move forward with this. And I know we had to delay for, we had a lot of momentum in the winter and spring of last year and then had to delay, but I'm hopeful that we find the way forward for this now so that we keep to that timeline. And I think it's a reasonable one. And then last, I guess I do have a question, which is how do we, we're learning animals, right? And we want to apply the growth mindset. So how do we learn during the process so that we evolve our approach before we implement? And then once we implement in the fall of 2022, how do we learn how effective what we're doing is and how to continue to evolve it? How do we track progress here? Because this is, it's a complex and, difficult challenge and opportunity for us. And I think it's, overly ambitious to say we're going to, get it exactly right the first time. So how do we evolve this? What are we going to measure? How do we use what we learn to continue to improve, what we're offering to our students?
Yeah, I would say this is probably one of the more complex initiatives and dynamic that we are taking on because it reaches to the core of the very being of the people of our community. When we talk about identity, when we talk about oppression, when we talk about lived experience, when we talk about racism, it's very difficult. And we will all, in many ways, be uncomfortable in this journey. So I think one is just having courage to move forward and stay together along the way, to cultivate the relationships, to stay grounded in our values and our norms. I think many of us saw what happened and it continues to happen at the state level with the ethnic studies journey, and it's very difficult. And so we want to learn, what's happening in the macro discussion, and just be cognizant that that these are very difficult issues. So I think because of that, there's no way we don't know what the end product's going to be. And this is actually a similar strategy as the CTE work that we did, is we did not come in with a predefined or prescribed notion of what the outcome was going to be. Kind of like Trustee Adams' question, right? Is this integrated or distinct? I mean, we're truly coming into this with an open mind and heart about where we could go. And then we wayfind as a community together. And I think this is where voice comes in, that when you create opportunities for voice from our students, from the diversity in our community, that informs our collective thinking around what we mean by ethnic studies when we talk about ethnic studies, because it's still pretty nebulous. I mean, it's a really big concept. It's interdisciplinary, historical, cultural forces and how they impact, identity and race and so forth. But we need to get more defined and more specific in the way we think about this. And that's a process that we do as a community. So just communicating and messaging what we're trying to do is very difficult because it is so nebulous, which is why we start with building community, listening, and then trial, experimentation, creating spaces for teachers to work with children or with students, and making sure, and this is coming from teachers. From last Monday, we synthesized their notes. One of the big takeaways was that they need to have safe spaces to do this work. And you know what, that's even more compelling right now, because our teachers and our students are under the microscope. I mean, they're completely deprivatized in a distance learning environment. So how do we create safe spaces, given our current environment, for teachers to try to be courageous, to open up hard conversations, to learn themselves, and they have to be vulnerable. Our staff has to be vulnerable in this work too. So this is a really, really big challenge, and it's going to be bumpy. The other thing that's going to be important is that we talked about voice, particularly student voice, and what we don't want to happen, and this is another big challenge for us as governance and leadership, is we don't want student voice to be tokenized. That when we say we value student voice, students are going to say things that are going to be hard for us to hear. And so we need to be modeling the willingness to listen and to follow at times. So that's another challenge. And then I think the thing that warms my heart personally is that a lot of the language we're using is the project-based learning world, voice and choice and student-centeredness, and this concept of debrief, that when we have an interaction together, whether it's in planning or in building or in just ideation, any type of interaction, how do we create spaces to debrief and reflect on what just happened? Because through that reflection process, when it's systematized in the way we interact, we grow as individuals. I mean, John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn by reflecting on an experience. Yeah. So how do we create that habit, as an organization and as a community working on this important work moving forward? So that's the best I can do to answer that question right now.
Well, that was a great answer, and I just want to pull a couple of quotes. I thought it was great that at the end of the orientation on Monday, teachers and staff provided some statements, and they were all great, but two that really struck out as me as really impactful. One was, I want everyone to have empathy, an empathetic and open discourse that is respectful, that honors perspectives and experiences. Just going in with that attitude is really powerful. And the other is we need to understand ourselves and where we are coming from so we can understand others. So I just think the contemplative process that you're describing, Roddy, is you've started down that path, and I applaud it. We have very, very high hopes and expectations for this. I think it's fantastic, and I'm glad we're doing it. So there's no action required on this item, except I am going to suggest an action, which is I'm going to work with the superintendent to put this back on a future agenda to get agendized for, you want to give a respectful amount of time to make progress, but certainly no later than the spring to have a follow-up conversation, and I'll work cooperatively to, to get it agendized. But I want to make sure that we continue to stay in touch with this, this initiative. Okay.